Hello, everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG Architecture Production Readiness Review Subproject meeting for October 7th, 2020. All right, let's begin. We have a new attendee today. Kendall, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kendall Nelson. I work for the OpenStack Foundation. Most of my involvement in Kubernetes so far has been over in SIG Cloud Provider, specifically Provider OpenStack, and SIG Contributor Experience. So I signed up like a week or so ago to all of the SIG architecture list to kind of get a better lay of the land and stuff. I wasn't sure exactly what this meeting was about, but I figured I would go to all of them and see how it's going.
Sure. Well, this tends to be a pretty small meeting, and pretty low key. Basically, I'm John Belmerick, and we have Wojtek, who's labeled as SIG Scalability right now, and David Eads, and so we started this subproject started a process a couple of releases ago of production readiness reviews for new features and features graduating to different stages. And so what we talk about here is if there's any questions that came up during those reviews that we want to consult with one another on, or changes in process, or that sort of thing as far as making those production readiness reviews happen.
Got it. Makes sense.
So it tends to be pretty short so far. Maybe next release we want to make it mandatory. PRRs we wanted to do it in 120, but we just sort of dropped the ball. I can take responsibility for that. And so anyway, that might get a little bit busier after that. So I'll bring up the agenda here. Right there. Right there. Are you seeing the agenda right now? Okay,
yes.
Good. Okay, so pretty short agenda. I wanted to, for Wojtek and David, we had some discussions on Slack. Were there any new things that came up from the reviews over the last few days that you wanted to discuss?
Yeah, I picked up a couple reviews for SIG CLI, SIG apps, and SIG storage. And going through them, they were trying to have a PRR review at the same time they're reviewing the implementation. And if I LGTM it, then I accidentally LGTM the whole thing, and that's not awesome. I think trying to divide out the design and then a separate poll for the PRR stuff will be a little bit easier, so that we don't have an accident like that. The other thing I noticed with the tool, the cap control tool, I should have read the help on the tool. I assumed it didn't do this, and I didn't actually look. Does it tell you? So I can query for PRR review approvers where it's got my name on it, or your name, or Wojtek's name. Is there a way for me to find the ones that are trying to target a particular release and don't have a PRR approval?
There shouldn't be. Well, so the cap validate, I believe, isn't supposed to allow. There may be legacy caps in implementable status that people are targeting towards the release via the milestone. But if they're trying to actually change the cap val tool requires a PRR approval to be assigned, okay. I believe.
Because I happened to find that there were not as many as I expected. I did eventually find a
bunch. I know, I found the same thing.
But I was surprised at how light it was. Although I guess I do know that SIG apps and SIG CLI and API machinery will all have fairly light releases planned for 120. So it could be.
Yeah, maybe it's just a light cycle. But I had the same concern, and we can investigate that because, like I said, there may be ones that the cap's not being touched, but they're just targeting it through the enhancements process. And I didn't go through the enhancements spreadsheet and like look to see that everybody had it. So we can check it out. Let me take a note.
Okay. The other thing that stood out to me when I was doing these reviews is that there was a feature that I wish that I had. So in a lot of these, even the ones in alpha, I really wish that I had a way to know how often a feature was taken advantage of, like a metric that says not just this feature is enabled, but the alpha flag or the alpha field that this enables is actually being set in these resources. And here's the percentage of resources, or I guess not the percentage, the number of resources of, say, the PVC type that are making use of this new feature, so that I can look and have some confidence, if I'm judging whether it works or not, that someone's actually using it with a good number on it.
So there is a question there that says, how can I tell if this feature is used?
There's a question there, but there's less of a like what I really want is like list all the PVCs, count the ones that have the field set, and set a count. I think that's what I want.
So yeah, so that's maybe a class of enhancement where like probably the question is more written around like, yeah. Okay.
And I just don't have an easy answer for someone to do. Like, I'd like for that to be really easy so that when I say like, hey, you should do this, they can go, okay, how do I do it? And I can link them to, here's how you do it. Do we think that's something valid for something like cube state metrics? It could potentially be a big resource get, right? Like if you're pulling all PVCs in a cluster or all pods in a cluster, there's a bunch of them. Do we have other ideas for how to tell?
I mean, like I said, right now it's kind of, there's no sort of common systematic way to do it. It's just we ask the question of each individual, and in some cases that might be, like there was one that was we talked about before where it was the FQDN name for the pod host name or something like that, and you could do a query to count those, right? But that's not a metric. I think it's in the listen through Slack, but I think my thinking there was I didn't necessarily want, maybe there was a super easy way to do it, but I didn't want somebody to go through a bunch of effort, create this metric that's actually not super useful for an operator. Like an operator, like oh no, this was for a different one. This was for if they set this host name too long, it would cause errors. It's like, as an operator, I don't care if my user if my user does something stupid. If they're seeing the failures in the events, they can fix what they did that's stupid. Like there's nothing really for me to do. So I wanted, in that sense, that's not the same as you're asking though. Yeah, I don't want to pollute with extra metrics, but I think there's a valuable metric to say, as an operator, this feature is being used in my cluster by this many resources. But we don't have an easy way to do that as far as I know.
Right. I mean, that was I wanted that, but I didn't know how to say like, hey, you should do this.
Yeah, I was also thinking about it during like multiple cats because like it's a common pattern, and I actually like finalized, like I actually ended up with saying like just write that you should use kubectl and use this filter or something like that to get this information, because throwing a new metric for each new thing is kind of Well, it has a value, but like it's not like exactly what we would like to do. Like having something like cube state metric or something like that that we would get automatically. That would be great, but like I didn't come up with anything like that. So I was ending up with like saying, okay, like the kubectl list all pods and filter by this field is for now good enough. We should think about something better in the future, but I don't want to block this cap because like we don't have good idea how to do that.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right. I mean, I guess, David, I would kind of throw this one back on API machinery in the sense of right now there's no metadata about the fields to know which fields are alpha, beta, whatever, right? So there's no sort of programmatic way that we can automatically have this kind of count. If we tagged fields as to their stage in the metadata of API machinery, then we could write a piece of code that just does this for people.
All right, I will think about that. That is, I won't say it's the last time we had to do something that touched all the types. I spent like a week and a half of my life touching all the types. But I'll think about it. There was one other thing that came up while I was thinking about it and reviewing what these things were doing. And I just, at the same time I was reviewing these, happened to be dealing with an internal problem in some of our CI runs where it appears that there's a request storm. And we're trying to figure out why. And it occurred to me that even with the metrics that people are adding, if the metrics aren't like, if they only track the things that they know they need to track, then we don't have an easy way when there is a request storm because some new feature got turned on to be able to say it was because of this. And if you guys recall the CVE from, I don't know, well, we fixed it like 6 months ago, 7 months ago. The one where you could send a user agent that was like, I don't know, 100K long or something, and it would blow out the Prometheus metrics. We have lost our ability to easily know via metrics who's making all the requests. I kind of want that back. Like, I'm thinking about like my life in production. Like right now I'm chasing it in CI, so I can actually do a lot of stuff. I have an audit log. I have a bunch of options, but being able to see it in the metrics would be really useful. Have we considered whether we would be willing to come back from this group with a recommendation that says like, hey, we can do a lot in terms of our readiness reviews, but this is a gap. And if we can't see who is making a request storm, even if it's somehow anonymized in the metrics data, but de-anonymizable, if you are a cluster admin on the cluster, that would be really helpful. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm also missing that in some debugging that I'm doing sometimes. I'm not sure like how this would work because I think like the like one thing was like the size of the individual label, and the other was like sending each request from like a different agent and like blowing the cardinality, blowing up. So I'm not sure if this is possible, but like I would really like to have it in metrics back. Yes, I agree.
Like I think about like what would make it easier to run Kubernetes in production. And this right now is and I think that's what our mission is, right? Like make it easier to run, it's easier and more reliable to run Kubernetes in production. That would be a huge difference, I think.
So, yeah, I guess I haven't looked at that specific CVE, but it sounds like what you're saying is one, it was the potentially the length of the specific values. So that was it user agent? Was it Was it authenticated user or what?
There were a
It was
couple
user
different
agent.
aspects of it. I think it was user agent specifically because people who could control it, and so they could control how big the names were,
Yeah.
control, what they were. There was also a PII concern from, I think, but I'm looking at it and wondering, like, if we had some kind of cluster salt, could we hash them down to get, I don't know, some reasonable number of hashes, so that even if somebody changes it and we have 10,000 hashes, if we have, we'll be able to catch the accidental people, not the malicious ones who are throwing different user agents out and they fill all the buckets, but we'd be able to catch the case where, like, oh, CSI driver foo, yeah, you screwed up somehow, and you're making 2,000 requests a second.
Right. I mean, that's certainly super valuable information, either by user agent or by the user, right? One or the other. It's super difficult to figure out what's going on otherwise, just looking at the path of what they're hitting.
So is that sort of thing that we would write up and say, like, hey, we want to have information? I think username's probably unique enough for what I'd be looking at, because we have different identities for most of the controllers now. People are pretty good about service accounts. And we would
I mean, that's a PII issue, though. You'd have to do some sort of anonymizing or something, right? I guess for product security committee, or I don't know if it'd be product security committee or who would be SIG auth or somebody would be upset about it.
Some of that is concerns by particular cloud providers about who's able to see metrics and stuff like that. But I could accept that, right? Even as a hash, if you get a reasonable number of buckets in a hash.
Right, and it would be anonymizable. I mean, in order to make it useful, well, I guess you could make it, if you know the hash, you can take the users that you use and you can hash them and see which one it is.
Exactly. Right, like I'd be able to de-anonymize it eventually. Whether I did it like that, whether I did it with some sort of protected resource that normal users can't see. Like the mechanism is less important to me than trying to figure out the, like, via metrics, who is doing this. Is my recent issues after we fixed that CVE have been made more difficult.
I mean, does it have to be via metrics? What about via logs? Can you get it? I mean, if you turn on audit logs, certainly you can get it, but can you get it via any other log?
I don't think so, because I need to associate not just the request, but to be able to figure out when a user's changed their access pattern. What I'm looking at now, I suspect, is caused by someone who messed up something in an upgrade to a minor release, right? I think a user agent changed. I had to dig through 6 gigs of audit logs to find it, and I can only do that because I'm in a CI environment, because, you know, otherwise a customer's saying, like, why do you want my audit logs? There's a lot of stuff in my audit logs. You tell me what you want me to look up, and I will describe to you what I see on my screen when I query my audit logs.
Yeah. Okay. I wonder if there's a way we could do it only for system components, right? I mean, maybe that's not sufficient for what you want, but, like, thinking from the PII perspective, right? Like, I don't think people will be concerned if it's internal components that are, you know, it's this controller, that controller, but their own workloads, they might not, and their own service accounts and things, they might not want you logging. Like, there could be a set of specific service accounts for which we log their access patterns or something like that.
Yeah.
So that is kind of something what we did with other things, I think. I can't remember exactly, but yes, we basically limited the potential values to some well-known set and other or something like that somewhere in the code. I can't remember exactly what that metric was, but there was some precedent for that. But I don't think that really helps for this particular issue that David is describing, or rather this class of issues, because, like, we are usually interested in like actual users, not the system components here.
Yeah, like when Argo
Or
CD,
they,
like you want to know that it was Argo CD. Like,
Yeah.
is that a system
It's
component?
some workload that's broken, not some. Yeah. Okay.
I've experienced both. Like this CI one is probably a system component, but I've also experienced things like Argo CD. People associate it with their system. They installed it. It went nuts.
Yeah. I mean, sure, David. You know.
I can write
Go
whatever.
for it, man. It sounds like you got a document to write.
I will write away. All right, I'll write away. But that was another thing that I was noting when I was going through the PRR reviews last week. Is that is information that I miss, and that I'm trying to make up for it in some ways by asking for metrics for these new features, when what would really satisfy would just be being able to know.
It's not going to solve the problem if it's some third-party tool that they deploy and it starts going crazy, right? The metrics, they're not going to have, that might have its own metrics, but it's got nothing to do with us.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So I think the big thing that you brought up here and previously on Slack is the how do we separate the review of the production readiness from the review of the PR that's the design. And I wrote up a couple tooling options. I didn't quite finish writing the details of each one, but and it was just a very quick thing I threw together. But I think that I hope that these goals capture what you're talking about there. So you'll notice one of the things that there's sort of a this is just as I was writing some of these up, I realized a little bit of a disjointedness because we tend to do we always do our approvals based upon a PR, but what we're really trying to do is approve sort of the life cycle of the CAP as opposed to the life cycle of the PR. And so I'm not sure that matters that much, but it kind of plays into some of the discussions below in the options. But essentially, ensuring that CAPs receive their review approval as they go to each stage, also alpha, beta, and stable. So that's a requirement of targeting the release. Ensuring that approving the PRR doesn't approve the entire CAP. We want discoverability. So we sort of have that now in that you can list all the ones where your PRR approver, but it doesn't actually things that are already done. It doesn't help you figure that out. There's so few of them right now that that's not been an issue, but you know, in a couple releases, if there's 50 or 60 of these in your list, you want to know which ones actually need to be done versus are already done. You can filter out implemented things right now, but it's a little hacky. You want to defer engaging this team until the CAP design is otherwise approved by the SIG leads or other CAP approvers. And then we want to ensure that the PRR approval is done by a member of this team. Any other goals we're missing about tooling?
Yeah, I think the nice to have, it's probably not like strictly required, but nice to have would be that I would be able to actually really approve, like fully approve the PRR without like asking SIG leads for approval, which I need to do now because like I'm not the owner of like say SIG instrumentation directory or anywhere. So
yeah.
On the one hand, like I'm not able to fully approve it. On the other hand, like someone else can approve it without my knowledge, even potentially. I think that the last point that like it really has to be PRR team that approves it is really a requirement. This one is nice to have because like we can work around it. Like I can ask, like, I can ping some SIG leads if they are not responding or whatever for that, but like it would be just easier.
All right. David, did those look reasonable to you? Do we have any non-goals? Anything like
There should always be a
out of
non.
scope?
But no, in this case, I can't think of anything that people get confused over. Overall, how do you guys think we?
Yeah, just
Like, I feel like this release went okay. I think based on the query of the tool after the fact, that might be colored by the fact that Wojtek did like 3 times as many as you and I did, John.
yeah.
But I thought it went okay.
Well, I kept looking at like, oh, there's hardly anything. Should have thought. Okay.
But what do you guys think?
So then, I mean, I think that 1 is a light release, and 2, yes, I think it went fairly well. But like I said, if you, yeah, I think the tooling is going to need to improve for next cycle, or it's going to be harder.
Yeah, and I like these goals.
Okay. So then, I didn't really get time to put anything like very thoughtful down here. But these were I believe these were the basic options we discussed on Slack, were like a PRR approved command and associated labels. I'm trying to remember how we do this with API review. I think both of you are API reviewers. I'm not. I know that there's a label that says API review is required. Do we have a special command, or do we just how do we do that? Do you remember?
When the label goes on there, you can actually filter pretty easily in GitHub on the label, and then if I'm being honest, it's usually that somebody bugs me, says like, "Hey, this label showed up. You need to go look at this," on Slack. And then the actual approval process, there's like there's a way that the folder ends up separated. It's still directory based, but only like it's like that approver directory. It doesn't honor the directory above it, if that makes sense.
Right. But there's a directory where the API or some piece of is it like a Sentinel touch or file, or is it like there's just some of the actual API code?
Yeah, that's where the actual APIs live.
Yeah. Okay. So it's natural there.
Now there was one that was different, isn't there? There might be a way that the vendor stuff gets skipped. I'm not a vendor approver. Wojtek wouldn't be because he has the whole thing. But there might be a way to punch out specific files inside of a directory.
There is not. Last I checked, I checked on this a while back, and I think our internal tooling maybe does it, but like I didn't see any tooling in the Kubernetes owner's prow stuff that allows you to specify like a glob or something and say this glob is punched out for a different set of approvers or something. I think it has to be a separate directory, so that would mean putting the PRR like in its own directory, and that's what some of these other options are. We talked a little bit about it being like a subdirectory of the KEP, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because then they have to put the right owner's file in to that directory, which is kind of hokey. Yeah, so this first option seems to require it would be a fairly familiar mechanism that we just say like a command PRR approved, and then you could use labels to find ones that are waiting. This would be about the PRs. We'd have to have a way to identify, like we do with API reviews, that a PR requires an API review. In this case, that a PR requires a PRR approval, which probably is trickier than it sounds. Like you have to probably inspect the actual like README, what's being touched, or we'd have to put look at the kept.yaml. So that's a little bit of a hassle. And I think PRR approved, you need some new prow functionality for that. And as I sort of mentioned, it's sort of like managing the PR lifecycle, not the KEP lifecycle. That's not necessarily a huge one. We always end up doing things on the PR. Where this comes in is that we're not managing and being like, oh, we're targeting this KEP to a release. Like, that's not done anywhere in GitHub. Like, we target individual PRs. I guess it is. It's done when you target the issue associated with the KEP. You set the milestone on it. So we potentially could block there rather than blocking in PRs in the enhancements directory. So those are probably our two sort of points of leverage, or where we can either in the milestone assignment, we could have a check that says these conditions aren't met with respect to the PRR, or we could look at every PR that touches the KEP and try and figure out what to do there. I'm not sure which is better. I don't know the tooling mechanisms well enough. The nice thing about doing it on the milestone is that in theory, they could write their whole KEP and not touch their KEP again when they graduate, because they already put in it, we're planning to graduate in 121 to beta. And then when 121 comes around, they just retarget the issue and they start writing PRs against the KEP, not against the KEP, but against the code that the KEP is designed for. And they never actually touch the KEP again, and we never have an opportunity to say, hey, you didn't fill this out.
Do we want to try to improve the world by improving the tooling? I mean, is
maybe.
That valuable? I'm just
like, right. That's a good question. It's do we make better tooling that supports what we need, or do we convolute our process to fit with the existing tooling? And I'm not sure what the right answer there is, right? Like the question would, the convolution, these two are these are probably the ones that are the two options that try to make the best use of existing tooling. And that's create a separate directory that the PRR team can be owners of, or per SIG, either way, with an owner, with a parent owner. This was the one I think we were most interested in the last discussion. We would leave the PRR in the README. We create a separate PRR metadata directory that basically contains whether this KEP has been approved for these different stages. And that would let us use the existing tooling for owners. But it has this, it splits the KEP metadata away from the approvals, away from the KEP itself. And think it's still going to require additional tooling because of what I just said. Like, how do we know? How does or it's going to require additional human enforcement by the enhancements team to say, hey, you didn't create this PR where the cap can be a PR where the PRR can be approved. There's nothing to force people to do that other than some human checking it or some new tooling. So I guess what I'm saying, given that nobody else is saying anything, I may as well just keep talking. This seems clunky and still requires some new tooling. So I would argue that, or some additional human toil. I would argue that we should at least consider and discuss with the enhancements team getting exactly what we want. And if that looks like it's going to be too difficult, then we can come up with a workaround.
Okay, and so exactly what we want is we would change the owner's calculation rules to have some kind of a match on files. So
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe that's one option. Maybe we need to write up that option too. I was thinking what we really want is when they try and do a milestone v1.21, it says for the feature issue. So the way that the
okay, I see. When you try to do that, I guess I'm used to grabbing the labels, but I guess that's not that many people have the label power. So.
Right. Yeah, I think you have to have right access to the repo to do labels, which most people don't have. KK at least. But I mean, this is the debate. Right? What is it we really want? Right. I'm thinking aloud. I'm thinking, well, what we really want is we want to do a review and approve it when they target it for alpha. They're going to have filled out the alpha stuff. When they target it for beta, we want to do another review. When they target it for stable, we want to do another review. I don't really care about how many iterations happen between those three gates. And so when they target the issue, I would think the milestone, one option would be they try to assign the milestone and says you can't assign that milestone because you haven't completed this yet. Now, I think that's a totally new process. I don't think we do that right now at all. You can target the milestone, the issue to any milestone you want, and nobody can stop you. The thing we do with milestones is on PRs, we won't merge PRs without the milestone, but that's separate. That's in KK. This is like in the enhancements repo.
Right. Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
Okay, so
I think that doesn't address the problem that in fear, like someone else can approve PRR for you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it can be approved by someone not from the PRR team. That's mostly what I mean. So unless we start, like we do some tooling to enforce, either someone will manually do that, someone from the enhancement team, or we will add some tooling that we like someone from PRR team approved or the corresponding PR.
All that does is is prevent them from entering into their release, but it doesn't change the mechanism of how we do the PR approval. That's where we would probably ideally, and I don't know the cons of this, ideally want what David mentioned, which is if we put it in a PRR.md and in the cap directory, and then the owner's files are set up such that this file in a cap directory can only be approved by this team, then that would get us, I think that in common, that would get us, actually this document mostly, that would get us mostly the things we want in this document, except for the first bullet point, which was ensure that they receive this at each stage. The milestone, that's the only thing that the milestone thing achieves.
Yes.
So the combination of those two things should get us everything we want. I suspect they're going to kick back and say, no, just put PRRs in a separate directory or something obnoxious like that. I don't know. We'll see.
They might be flexible if somebody actually wrote the code for it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how complicated that code is. I've never been in there.
I haven't looked at that either. Well, I've looked a little bit at the owner stuff, but not specifically the approved plugin. Okay.
I think, we can do what I think, David, you mentioned it before also. Like we can have the subdirectory and the existing like cap directory. Like for each cap has a subdirectory.
It'd be a pain though, right? I mean,
they'd have to set the owner's file up in there correctly. Like we could do the PRR metadata thing along with the milestone thing, because the milestone thing would then just check for that file and that it's been approved for that same stage. And the feature issue has a tag with the stage and everything on it, or if you look at the kep.yaml, like we can probably, between the kep.yaml, the labels, and the a separate directory with PRR, just metadata, we can probably enforce that. So basically, it gets, when I said the PRR metadata looks like the best thing, except that there's no reason somebody can't just completely ignore it and not do it, and we'd never find out about it. Like the milestone thing prevents that.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. So let me take a note. I can write that up as what we want. Sense? So the minimum bar is we could just start with the check in the separate directory. If that turns out to be too much of a hassle, we can talk about updating owners' files. I mean, I can discuss this verbally with the enhancements team, who at least some of the folks in there, I think, are familiar with the PROW stuff, or discuss it with somebody else as needed. So I'll write something up. Would that meet all our goals? Just to double check. We would meet that with the milestone thing. This would now be a separate file or directory so that we can approve it without having worrying about approving the whole PR or the whole cap. Like that would be done in a separate PR, is what we would suggest. Enable discovery of keps awaiting approval by PRR approver. That doesn't do anything for that, although the tool could now double check that extra metadata if we had it. The metadata one does something for that with some work on the KEP control tool. Defer engaging the PR team until the KEP is otherwise approved. I think it does that. We'd say do this in a separate PR. Ensure the PR approval is done by a member. Yes, it does that. And it does that. So I think that the separate metadata directory requires less tooling change and probably is the way to go for now, unless somebody hates it.
I'll think about it.
Silence is assent. Is that way?
Give me a day to think about it.
Sure. The meeting, the enhancement meeting is on Tuesday. I'm not going to bring it to anybody before then. So
Okay.
a week from
I'm
yesterday.
just going to think about, like, you know, would everyone thank us, or would they come around and want to?
I know, punch us.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also a discussion. This is where it might get interesting. So there's a discussion, and I don't think I don't know where it stands right now. But today, the enhancements team goes through this sort of laborious process of going through this spreadsheet. And there's a discussion of creating a receipt system where basically, in order to get into a release, rather than this sort of back and forth with humans, you create a PR that says, I want this feature in this release at this stage in a special directory that the release team owns. And so this might dovetail in with that somehow, but I'm not sure exactly how.
Maybe. I mean, that might be at least more palatable, because I'm just trying to think about someone who they own the content of what's in there. If they want to go through and, you know, like, adjust a metric and stuff, telling them you got to go to this separate directory. When I'm writing caps, I want to thank you.
Yeah, and well, I mean, for that matter, though, if the system doesn't notify us if they go just change the content of the PRR after we approve it.
That's true.
Either.
All right. I'll try to make myself.
Try to give it some more thought before I write something up.
Okay.
That last point is sort of like, I mean, at some point we trust people, right? Like, so.
I do generally, because I'm not going to review the code that implements this. So, like, if it's not true,
exactly,
what they wrote in the PRR wasn't true, I would never know. I would have approved them anyway. I would be happy with it. Until
exactly.
I can figure out why.
Yeah, until you hit it in production. Okay, well, that feels a little bit inconclusive, but let's circle back around before like by the end of the week, if you could, because like I said, I would want Monday to write anything down before I bring it to Tuesday. Not that it's like super urgent, but it'd be nice to move it along.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there anything else?
Nothing for me.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll talk next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.